The sliding doors of Phoenix Children's Hospital parted like curtains on fate as Estrella Davis rushed through them, her 9-year-old daughter, Catalina, limp in her arms. The emergency room buzzed with controlled chaos, nurses moving with practiced efficiency, monitors beeping their electronic hymns, and the antiseptic smell that seemed to live in the walls of every hospital. "Please, she collapsed at school," Estrella said to the triage nurse, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "High fever, rash, and now she's barely responsive." Catalina had been sick for 2 days, but this morning everything changed. The fever spiked to dangerous levels, angry red spots bloomed across her golden skin, and her usual bright chatter faded to worrying silence. Estrella had used her last emergency day off work and spent her grocery money on the Uber ride here, but her daughter's life was worth any sacrifice. "Room 12, the nurse said after a quick assessment. "Dr. Gilbert will see her immediately." The name meant nothing to Estrella as she followed the nurse down corridors lined with colorful murals designed to distract children from their pain. Room 12 waited behind heavy doors that seemed to guard secrets she couldn't imagine. "The doctor will be right in," the nurse assured her before disappearing into the controlled urgency of the pediatric ward. Estrella settled Catalina onto the examination table, smoothing damp curls from her daughter's fevered forehead. At 9, Catalina was her entire world, brilliant, stubborn, and beautiful in ways that made strangers stop to comment. She had unusual eyes, a striking hazel that seemed to shift between green and gold depending on her mood. The door opened, with a soft click that somehow echoed through Estrella's soul. "Good evening, I'm Dr. Gilbert." Time stopped, literally stopped, as if someone had paused the entire universe with a cosmic remote control. Standing in the doorway, older and more distinguished but unmistakably the same, was Chandler Gilbert, the man who had been her first love, her planned future, her greatest heartbreak. His clipboard slipped from shocked fingers, clattering to the floor like applause for this impossible reunion. 10 years had refined his features, added confidence to his bearing, and success to his stance. But those hazel eyes remained exactly the same. The eyes Catalina had inherited. Estrella. Her name escaped his lips like a prayer he'd been saving. For a decade. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the roaring in her ears and the weight of her daughter between them. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not now, not when Catalina was sick and vulnerable and completely unaware that her entire world was about to shift on its axis. "Chandler," she whispered, the name feeling foreign and familiar simultaneously. He moved toward them like a man walking through quicksand, his professional training warring with personal earthquake. When his eyes fell on Catalina, something indefinable shifted in his expression, recognition perhaps, or simply the instinctive response of a pediatrician to a critically ill child. "What are her symptoms?" he asked, his voice carefully professional. Despite the tremor, Estrella caught beneath the surface. "Fever for 2 days, now this rash, and she's been getting more lethargic," Estrella managed, forcing herself to focus on Catalina's needs rather than the impossibility of this moment. "She's never been this sick." Chandler approached the examination table with careful steps, his medical training overriding personal chaos. "Hello, sweetheart," he said softly to Catalina. "I'm Dr. Chandler. Can you tell me how you're feeling?" Catalina's eyes fluttered, open, those distinctive hazel irises focusing on his face with difficulty. "Tired," she whispered, "and cold." "We're going to help you feel better," Chandler promised, his hands gentle as he began his examination. "Your mom brought you to exactly the right place." As he worked, Estrella found herself cataloging the changes 10 years had wrought. Success emanated from him like warmth. The expensive watch, the perfectly fitted lab coat, the confident way he moved through the room. Yet something in his eyes suggested that all his achievements hadn't filled the loneliness she remembered from. In their college days, how old is she? He asked quietly, his stethoscope pressed to Catalina's chest. The question hung between them like a live wire. Estrella's heart hammered as she watched him calculate, saw the exact moment realization began to dawn in his brilliant mind. 9, he said simply. His hands stilled for just a moment, his eyes meeting hers across their daughter's fevered form. In that instant, she saw him doing the math, saw understanding flicker like lightning on the horizon. She has remarkable eyes, he said carefully. Yes, she does. Estrella's voice was barely audible. The rash and fever pattern suggests a viral syndrome, Chandler said finally, slipping back into professional mode. I want to run some tests and monitor her overnight. I'm admitting her for observation. Our insurance, Estrella began automatically, the familiar weight of financial worry crushing down. I'll handle all the arrangements personally, Chandler interrupted gently. Catalina's health is what matters right now. Their eyes met. Again, and 10 years of separation seemed to telescope into nothing. The connection that had once bound them together flickered back to life, complicated now by the presence of the child who bore his eyes and her strength. Estrella, he said quietly, after I get Catalina settled, we need to talk. Before she could respond, Catalina stirred again, her small voice cutting through the adult tension like a blade through silk. Mommy, the doctor has eyes like mine. The innocent observation landed between them with devastating accuracy. Chandler's face went pale as understanding crystallized into certainty, and Estrella felt her carefully guarded secret begin to crack under the weight of a child's perfect honesty. Chapter 2. Memories flood back. The heart keeps perfect time, measuring not minutes but moments that matter. The private room overlooking Phoenix's desert landscape became a sanctuary where past and present collided like storm fronts over the mountains. Catalina slept peacefully now, her fever responding to medication, her small hand curled around a stuffed coyote that had mysteriously appeared from the hospital gift shop. Estrella sat vigil beside the bed while Chandler reviewed test results. With the focused intensity she remembered from their study sessions, some things transcended time, the way he pressed his lips together when thinking, the slight crease between his brows when processing complex information, the unconscious finger-combing of his hair when deep in concentration, the silence stretched between them like a bridge, spanning a decade of separate lives. Estrella found herself transported to another late night, this one 10 years past, when they'd stood together on his apartment balcony, planning a future that had seemed as infinite as the Arizona sky. That particular night remained crystal clear in her memory. The warm desert breeze carrying orange blossom scent from the courtyard below. Chandler wrapping his medical school acceptance letter around her finger like a promise ring, both of them laughing while secretly meaning every word of the commitment it represented. Her vitals are stabilizing, he said quietly, voice barely above a whisper in deference to their sleeping daughter. The rash is already fading. She should be discharged tomorrow. Thank you. The words felt insufficient for everything he'd done. The private room, the personal attention, the way he'd somehow made insurance and billing disappear entirely. I don't know how to... Don't, he said softly, echoing conversations from their past about pride and independence and the complicated dynamics of accepting help from someone you loved. Please don't make this about obligation. The quiet that followed was heavy with unspoken questions and carefully buried memories. Chandler moved to the window, his reflection ghost-like in the glass, and Estrella remembered a younger version of this man, less polished but burning with the same intensity that had first captured her completely. Then he'd been all sharp, angles and earnest ambition, wearing thrift store clothes and surviving on coffee and dreams. She'd fallen for his passion about healing children, the way his entire face transformed when discussing his future, the gentle strength that could calm a crying baby or ease her fears with equal skill. "She's incredible," he said suddenly, gaze falling on Catalina's peaceful form. "Intelligent, brave, beautiful, you've raised someone extraordinary." The compliment hit like a physical blow, carrying weight of struggles he couldn't know about. Nights working multiple jobs while completing community college, meals skipped, so Catalina could eat. The constant worry about providing for a child whose father didn't know she existed. Single motherhood had forged her into someone stronger than she'd imagined possible, but it had also left invisible scars. "I've done my best," she whispered, throat tight with emotions locked away for years. "It hasn't always been easy." The understatement hung between them, loaded with implications she couldn't voice. How could she explain the loneliness of making every decision alone, the terror of being solely responsible for another person's well-being, the way she sometimes found herself talking to his memory during dark hours when Catalina was sick and she had no one else? "Where's her father?" The question came so quietly she almost missed it, but it struck with lightning force, illuminating everything in stark clarity. Estrella's hands trembled as she struggled for words that wouldn't shatter their careful reunion. "He doesn't know about her." Chandler turned from the window, hazel eyes searching her face with intensity that made her feel transparent, as if he could read every secret she'd tried to hide from the world. "Estrella," he said, her name carrying weight of questions he wasn't ready to voice but couldn't suppress. "How long has it been since we—" 10 years, 2 months, 18 days, she said automatically, then flushed at revealing how precisely she'd kept count, how obvious it made her continued feelings for the man she'd tried desperately to forget. His sharp intake of breath was audible in the quiet room. She watched him calculate, saw the exact moment realization dawned like sunrise over desert mountains, watched color drain from his face as mathematical impossibility became certainty. "The night before graduation," he said, voice barely audible, heavy with memory and implication. Yes, the single word hung between them like a confession, heavy with unspoken truths. That night had been everything. Passionate, desperate, full of promises and plans that crumbled when reality intruded on their dreams like an unwelcome guest. She remembered every detail with painful clarity. How he'd looked at her in moonlight, streaming through his bedroom window, tears in his eyes when he whispered that he loved her but couldn't see a way forward. The feeling of her heart shattering into pieces so small, she wondered if they could ever be reassembled. Chandler sank into the chair across from her, his successful physician's composure cracking like desert earth in drought. "Dear God, Estrella, are you telling me that Catalina is—" "Don't!" She held up a hand, tears threatening to spill like precious desert rain. "Please don't say it until you're ready to deal with what it means." "Ready?" His voice cracked with emotion, years of professional control evaporating. "How could anyone be ready for this? I have a daughter, a 9-year-old daughter who's been living 20 minutes away this entire time, and I never knew." The anguish in his voice cut through her like a blade, sharp and devastating. She'd imagined this conversation countless times, rehearsed explanations and justifications, but nothing had prepared her for the raw pain of watching him process what he'd missed. "You left," she said, words sharper than intended, carrying a decade of accumulated hurt. "You chose medical school and your family's expectations over us. I wasn't going to trap you with a pregnancy you never asked for." "Never asked for," Chandler's voice rose, then dropped as he remembered their sleeping daughter. Estrella, I wanted everything with you, marriage, children, a life together, but the pressure, the expectations, I thought I was protecting us both. The confession hit like a physical blow, rewriting history she'd spent years accepting. In her memory, he'd been eager to escape, ready for his new life without complications she represented. Learning that he'd struggled too, that the choice had cost him as much as it cost her, changed everything and nothing simultaneously. Well, now you know, she said, standing abruptly and moving to the window where she couldn't see the pain in his eyes, couldn't be tempted to comfort the man who'd unknowingly abandoned them both. We've managed fine without you. Have you? His voice was directly behind her now, close enough that she could feel warmth radiating from his body, could smell the familiar scent that still made her knees weak. Because you look exhausted, Estrella. You look like you've been carrying the world alone for 10 years. She whirled to face him, angry tears finally spilling like a dam bursting after holding back a decade of floodwaters. What did you expect? You think it's been easy raising your daughter alone? You think there haven't been nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I made the right choice, wondering if she deserved to know her father, even if he didn't want to know her? I would have wanted to know her, Chandler said fiercely, hands reaching for her shoulders, his touch sending electricity through her despite years of separation. I would have wanted to know both of you every single day. Would you? She challenged, stepping back because she couldn't think clearly when he was close, when his presence filled all the empty spaces she'd learned to navigate alone. Even if it meant disappointing your family, even if it meant changing all your plans. Chandler's hands dropped, and she saw truth written across his face. He didn't know. He couldn't know how he would have reacted to an unplanned pregnancy at 25, under enormous pressure to succeed, when family expectations weighed like golden chains. The silence stretched between them, filled with ghosts of choices unmade, and roads not taken. In the distance, Phoenix glittered like scattered diamonds against black velvet, millions of lives being lived parallel to their small drama of reunion and regret. I can't change the past, he said quietly, voice heavy with accumulated regrets. But I'm here now, and if Catalina is my daughter, God, Estrella, if she's really mine. She is, Estrella whispered, the secret finally released after years of careful guarding, truth floating between them like a bird freed from its cage. She's yours, Chandler, every stubborn, brilliant, beautiful piece of her. The confession hung in air between them like a bridge spanning a decade of separation and pain. Chandler's face cycled through emotions, shock, joy, regret, overwhelming love, before settling into something resembling wonder mixed with devastating regret. I need to be certain, he said finally, medical training asserting itself even amid emotional chaos. A DNA test. Not because I don't believe you, but because I need everything completely clear before we move forward. Of course, Estrella nodded, understanding his need for scientific certainty, even as her heart broke slightly at his careful distance, at the wall of protocol he was building between them and overwhelming emotions. And then we figure out what comes next. Chandler continued, voice growing stronger with each word, taking on the decisive tone she remembered when he tackled complexity. Problems with methodical precision, because if Catalina is my daughter, then everything changes. Estrella was about to respond when Catalina stirred, her small voice cutting through tension like a knife through silk, innocent and pure and completely unaware of adult complexities swirling around her. Mommy, why are you crying? Did I do something wrong? Both adults rushed to her bedside, and Estrella smoothed her daughter's hair with trembling hands, heart breaking at concern in those hazel eyes that were so achingly familiar, No, baby girl, you didn't do anything wrong. Dr. Chandler and I were just talking about grown-up things. Catalina's gaze shifted between them, with unsettling perception that only children possess, that ability to see truth even when adults try to hide it behind careful words and forced smiles. Are you the reason Mommy sometimes looks sad when she thinks I'm not watching? The question hit Chandler like a physical blow, and Estrella saw him close his eyes as if absorbing pain that cut straight to his soul, as if the weight of 10 years of missed moments had suddenly become too heavy to bear. Go back to sleep, sweetheart, Estrella whispered, but Catalina's next words shattered the fragile peace they'd been trying to maintain. Are you my daddy? Chapter 3. Unspoken Truths. Truth has its own gravity, pulling everything toward it until even the most carefully constructed lies collapse under its weight. The question hung in the sterile air like a live wire, crackling with electricity that threatened to ignite everything it touched. Catalina's innocent gaze moved between the two adults, whose lives she'd just turned upside down, with 4 simple words that carried the weight of a decade's worth of secrets. Chandler's face had gone completely white, his hands gripping the bed, rail as if it were the only thing keeping him anchored to reality. The successful physician who commanded respect in boardrooms and operating theaters had been reduced to a man struggling to find words adequate for the moment that would define the rest of his life. His carefully controlled world of medical precision and scientific certainty had just been shattered by a child's intuitive question that cut straight to the heart of everything he'd been afraid to hope for. Estrella felt her carefully constructed world spinning out of control, 10 years of secrets suddenly exposed by her daughter's devastating intuition. The child who had been her greatest joy and her deepest secret had just shattered every careful wall she'd built around the truth with the innocent directness that only children possessed. Her hands trembled as she reached for Catalina, needing the anchor of physical contact to steady herself against the emotional earthquake that was reshaping the landscape of their lives. Why would you ask that, sweetheart? Estrella managed, her voice barely steady, her heart hammering like a caged bird desperate for freedom. She could feel Chandler's eyes on her, could sense the weight of his unspoken questions, the hope and fear warring in his expression as he waited for her response. Catalina struggled to sit up in her hospital bed, her fever-bright eyes studying Chandler with the relentless curiosity of a child who sensed something momentous happening around her. The IV line tugged gently at her small hand, but she ignored. The discomfort focused entirely on the mystery unfolding before her. Her illness had sharpened her perceptions rather than dulling them, as if the fever had burned away the social conventions that usually kept children from speaking obvious truths. He looks like me, she said, with the matter-of-fact tone children used when stating obvious truths that adults somehow couldn't see. And you look at him the way you look at the picture in your special box, the way you look when you think nobody's watching and you get that sad, happy face. Estrella's heart stopped completely. The picture in her jewelry box, the only photograph she'd kept from their college days, hidden away like a treasure too precious and too painful to display. It showed her and Chandler at the pre-med formal, both laughing at something he'd whispered in her ear, both glowing with the kind of love that seemed invincible against time and circumstance. She had no idea Catalina had discovered it, had been observing her private moments of remembrance with the sharp awareness that children possessed. The memory of that particular night crashed over her like a tidal wave, the way his hands had, felt on her waist as they danced to music she could no longer remember, the way he'd told her she was beautiful in a voice rough with emotion, the way they'd stayed on that dance floor long after the music ended, unwilling to let the magic fade into ordinary time. She remembered the dress she'd worn, borrowed from a roommate because she couldn't afford anything new, how Chandler had made her feel like a princess despite the second-hand fabric and borrowed shoes. "What picture?" Chandler asked quietly, his voice rough with barely contained hope and something that sounded like wonder. His medical training was struggling to process this emotional complexity, to categorize feelings that defied scientific classification. "The one where Mommy looks really happy," Catalina said with devastating simplicity, her young voice cutting through the complexity of adult emotions like a blade through fog. "Like she does in dreams sometimes when she says your name. She gets this smile that's different from all her other smiles, like she's remembering something that made her heart feel full." The admission hit both adults like lightning strikes. In the desert, illuminating everything in stark, unavoidable clarity. Estrella closed her eyes, mortified that her sleeping subconscious had betrayed secrets she'd worked so hard to bury during waking hours. The night she'd awakened with his name on her lips, the dreams where they'd never been separated, where they'd built the life together that had been stolen by pride and circumstance. All of it exposed by her daughter's innocent but devastating observation. How many nights had Catalina heard her talking to memories in her sleep? How many mornings had her daughter watched her look at that hidden photograph with longing she thought she'd concealed? The realization that her carefully guarded emotional life had been an open book to someone who loved her enough to pay attention was both humbling and terrifying. Chandler stared at her with an expression that contained so much longing and regret it physically hurt to witness. She could see him processing this information, understanding that she'd carried their love through a decade of separation, that he'd never been truly forgotten despite the silence that stretched between them like a desert waiting for rain. His hands flexed at his sides as if he wanted to reach for her, but didn't dare cross the invisible boundaries that grief and time had erected between them. "Catalina," Estrella said carefully, her voice trembling with the weight of truths she wasn't ready to speak. "Dr. Chandler and I knew each other a long time ago, before you were born." "Were you best friends?" Catalina asked, but her tone suggested she already knew the answer was much more complicated than simple friendship could explain. Her young face showed the kind of serious concentration she usually reserved for particularly challenging science projects, as if she was conducting an experiment in adult emotions. The question hung in the air, loaded with implications that neither adult was prepared to address. How could they explain to a 9-year-old the complexity of first love, the way it could burn so bright it seemed eternal, only to be extinguished by circumstances beyond anyone's control? How could they describe the kind of connection that transcended logic and reason, that made two people feel like they'd found their other half in a world of billions? "We were very close," Chandler said softly, his eyes never leaving Estrella's face, the careful words carrying volumes of unspoken meaning. "Your mother meant everything to me. She was my best friend, my study partner, my inspiration, my—" He paused, searching for words that would be appropriate for young ears while still carrying truth. "She was the person who made me believe I could become the doctor I wanted to be." "What happened?" Catalina asked with the relentless logic of childhood, unwilling to accept adult evasions when simple questions deserved simple answers. "If you loved each other, why weren't you together when I was born?" The silence that followed was heavy, with the ghost of choices made and unmade, roads taken and abandoned. In the distance, the city of Phoenix sparkled like scattered diamonds against black velvet, millions of stories being lived parallel to their own small drama of reunion and regret. The weight of explanation felt overwhelming, the complexity of their past almost impossible to distill into words a child could understand. "Sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult choices," Estrella said finally, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. Sometimes they think they're doing what's best, even when it breaks their hearts. Sometimes the world makes demands that feel impossible to ignore. She thought about those final weeks of college, the pressure from Chandler's family about his future, the scholarships and opportunities that required him to move across the country, the crushing weight of practical considerations that had seemed to make their love an impossible luxury they couldn't afford. Catalina considered this with the serious expression of a child trying to understand adult complexities that seemed unnecessarily complicated. Her fevered mind was working through the emotional mathematics of their situation with the same precision she brought to her science homework. "But you found each other again," she pointed out with irrefutable logic. "So maybe it wasn't really broken. Maybe it was just waiting." The observation was so innocent, so hopeful, that it nearly undid both adults completely. From the mouth of a child came wisdom that cut straight to the heart of their situation. Despite 10 years of separation, despite the pain and regret, despite all the reasons why they shouldn't be here together, fate had brought them back to this moment when they could finally choose each other freely. "Maybe," Chandler said softly, his voice filled with wonder as he looked at the daughter he'd never known existed, this perfect synthesis of everything he'd loved about Estrella. "Maybe some things are strong enough to survive anything, even time and distance and our own fears." "Like love?" Catalina asked with the romantic optimism of a child raised on fairy tales and happy endings, her eyes bright with fever and possibility. "Like love," he confirmed, and Estrella saw tears threatening to spill from his eyes as the full magnitude of what he'd found and lost and found again settled in his heart like sunrise after the longest night. The kind of love that creates beautiful, brilliant daughters who ask exactly the right questions at exactly the right time. Catalina smiled then, bright and beautiful and completely trusting in the way that only children could be when the adults in their world finally started making sense. "Good," she said with satisfaction, "because I think I'd like you to be my daddy. You have the right kind of eyes for it." The simple declaration hit Chandler like a physical blow, and Estrella watched him struggle to contain emotions too large for words. His hands shook as he reached toward Catalina's face, then stopped himself, as if afraid his touch might somehow damage this precious miracle he was only now discovering. The pediatrician who had comforted hundreds of children was suddenly uncertain how to touch his own daughter, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was offering him. "I would like that too," he whispered, his voice breaking with the weight of 10 years of missed moments and the promise of all the moments yet to come. "More than anything in the world, more than I've ever wanted anything. But we need to be sure," Estrella said gently, her protective instincts asserting themselves even in this moment of reunion and wonder. "We need to do a test to prove it scientifically, not because I doubt what I know in my heart, but because the world will need proof." "Will it hurt?" Catalina asked with the practical concern of a child who'd already had enough needles for one day, her small hand unconsciously moving to the IV site that still ached from blood draws and medication. "Not at all," Chandler assured her, his voice warm with paternal protection that came as naturally as breathing. "Just a little swab inside your cheek, easy as brushing your teeth, much easier than what you've already been through tonight." "Okay," Catalina said simply, her trust in him already complete, in the way that only children could offer their faith to adults who showed them genuine kindness. Then she yawned hugely, the combination of illness and emotional excitement finally catching up with her small body. "I'm sleepy now. Will you stay?" The question was directed at Chandler, and Estrella saw him struggle with how to answer. What promises could he make when everything was still so uncertain? How could he commit to being present when the legal and emotional complexities of their situation had yet to be resolved? The doctor in him wanted certainty, scientific proof, while the man in him already knew the truth in his bones. "I'll stay as long as you want me to," he said finally, and Estrella knew he was making a commitment that went far beyond the next few hours, a promise that spoke to the kind of father he wanted to be regardless of what any test might reveal. "I'll stay as long as you'll have me." Catalina settled back into her pillows with a contented sigh that spoke of a child who felt safe and loved for perhaps the first time in her young life. "Good. I like you. You have the same hands as Mommy, the kind that make everything better, the kind that feel like home." The observation was so innocent, so pure, that it nearly undid both adults completely. Within minutes, exhaustion claimed her, and she drifted back into peaceful sleep, leaving the two adults alone with the magnitude of what had just transpired and the weight of decisions that would shape all their futures. "She's perfect," Chandler said softly, his eyes never leaving Catalina's sleeping face, drinking in every detail as if he could memorize a lifetime of missed moments in a single night. "How did you do it? How did you raise someone so extraordinary all by yourself?" "I wasn't by myself," Estrella said quietly, her voice filled with the fierce love that had sustained her through the darkest moments of single motherhood. "I had her. She's been my strength, my purpose, my everything. There were hard times, but she made it all worthwhile. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, she made it all worth it." Chandler looked up at her then, and she saw tears threatening to spill from his eyes, saw the full weight of realization settling on his shoulders like a mantle he would carry for the rest of his life. "I'm sorry, Estrella. I'm so sorry you had to do it alone. I'm sorry I wasn't there for her first word, her first steps, her first day of school." "Stop," Estrella said firmly, moving closer despite every instinct that warned her to maintain distance, to protect herself from the pain of reopening old wounds. "We can't change the past. We can only decide what happens from here." "What do you want to happen?" he asked, his voice vulnerable in a way she'd never heard before, stripped of all pretense and professional authority. What would be best for Catalina? It was the right question. Not what would be best for them, but what would be best for their daughter. The question of a man who was already thinking like a father, who understood that her needs had to come before their own complicated emotions and unresolved history. "I want her to know you," Estrella admitted, the words coming from the deepest part of her heart, the place where she'd always known this moment would come eventually. "I want her to have what I never could give her, a father who loves her. But I won't let anyone hurt her, Chandler, not even you." "I would never hurt her," he said fiercely, his voice carrying the kind of protective love that transforms men into fathers in an instant. "I would die before I let anyone hurt her." "Then we'll take this slow," Estrella said, laying out the conditions that would protect them all from the emotional chaos that threatened to overwhelm their careful boundaries. "One step at a time, for her sake." Chandler nodded, understanding the wisdom in her caution, accepting the rules she was setting. For this impossible situation, they found themselves navigating together. "The DNA test will be processed by tomorrow evening, results within 48 hours. And then we figure out how to be a family," he said simply, the words carrying a weight of promise and possibility that made Estrella's heart race with hope and terror in equal measure. "Because family is what we are, Estrella. Whether the test confirms what we already know or not, you and Catalina are the most important people in my world now." The declaration hung between them, heavy with promise and possibility, charged with the electricity of dreams that had never really died, despite years of careful burial. But before either could respond, Catalina stirred in her sleep, her small voice cutting through the adult tension with innocent wisdom. "I love you both," she murmured, without opening her eyes, her words carrying the simple truth that would bind them together, regardless of what any test might reveal. As Chandler reached out to gently smooth their daughter's hair, and Estrella watched this tender gesture with her heart full of hope and fear, neither of them noticed the shadow that moved past the window. Oracle Bryce had been making her evening rounds as a hospital volunteer, and what she'd just witnessed through the partially open door would soon set in motion a chain of events that would test their newfound family in ways they never could have imagined. Chapter 4. A Family Rekindled. Sometimes the greatest courage isn't in fighting battles, but in allowing yourself to hope again after your heart has been broken. The DNA results arrived on a Thursday morning that dawned clear and bright over the Arizona desert, delivered to Chandler's office in a sealed envelope that held either confirmation of a miracle or the destruction of his newfound hope. His hands trembled as he opened it, and when he saw the words, "Probability of paternity 99.97%, he had to sit down before his legs gave out entirely. Catalina was his daughter, his brilliant, beautiful, perfect daughter who had inherited his eyes and Estrella's incredible spirit. 2 hours later, he stood outside the modest apartment complex in Glendale, where Estrella and Catalina had returned after her hospital discharge, his heart hammering with the kind of nervousness he hadn't felt since his medical boards. Through their window he could see them reading together, Catalina curled against her mother's side like she belonged there, which, of course, she did. "Special delivery," he said softly when Estrella opened the door, holding up the official envelope. "The results." Her voice was barely a whisper, hope and fear warring in her expression. "I have a daughter," he said, his voice breaking with wonder. "We have a daughter." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge spanning 10 years of separation and doubt. Estrella's hand flew to her mouth as tears spilled down her cheeks, and behind her, Catalina appeared with the radar that children possess for sensing momentous occasions. "Daddy?" she asked, the word tentative but hopeful, as if she was testing how it felt on her tongue. "Yes, baby girl," Chandler said, kneeling to meet her at eye level. "If you want me to be." "I want that more than anything," Catalina said, launching herself into his arms with such enthusiasm that they both nearly toppled over, her small body warm and solid and real against his chest. Over Catalina's head, Chandler met Estrella's eyes and saw the same mixture of joy and terror he felt in his own heart. They were a family now, officially and undeniably, but the logistics of merging their separate lives felt overwhelming. "So what happens now?" Catalina asked, pulling back to study his face with serious eyes that were so much like his own. "Well," Chandler said carefully, "I was hoping you might both like to come stay with me for a while. I have a house with a swimming pool and a garden where roadrunners come to visit every morning." "Really? Roadrunners?" Catalina's eyes lit up with the kind of pure excitement that only children could feel about such simple wonders. "Every single morning," Chandler confirmed. "They're very punctual." "Can we, Mom? Please?" Catalina turned to Estrella with pleading eyes. Estrella hesitated, and Chandler saw the internal war playing out across her features, the desire to give Catalina everything she'd never had warring, with the fear of depending on someone who had left her once before. "It would just be temporary," he said quickly, "until we figure out what's best for everyone. You'd have complete privacy, no pressure, no expectations, just a chance for me to get to know my daughter and to help however I can." "Please, Mom," Catalina said again, and looking into her daughter's hopeful face, Estrella couldn't find the strength to say no. "Okay," she said softly. "We'll try it. For a little while." The drive to Paradise Valley took them through some of the most exclusive neighborhoods in Phoenix, past sprawling estates hidden behind desert landscaping and artistic walls. Catalina pressed her nose to the window of Chandler's BMW, her eyes wide with wonder at the luxury surrounding them. "You live here?" she asked, as they pulled through the gates of a stunning contemporary home that seemed to emerge from the landscape itself, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that captured the desert light. "We live here," Chandler corrected gently, "for as long as you want to." The front door opened before they reached it, and Phoenix Gilbert emerged with a smile that transformed her entire face. Chandler's mother was everything Estrella remembered from their brief college meetings: warm, elegant, and genuinely kind, with silver hair that caught the sunlight and eyes that held decades of wisdom. "Estrella, darling," Phoenix said, embracing her like a long-lost daughter, "welcome home." Behind her came Payson and Oracle. Payson looked exactly as Estrella remembered, gentle, thoughtful, with the same kind eyes as his brother. Oracle had changed. More, her beauty now polished to magazine perfection, her smile bright but somehow not quite reaching her eyes. "And this must be Catalina," Phoenix said, kneeling to meet her granddaughter at eye level. "Oh my goodness, but you're beautiful. You have your father's eyes and your mother's spirit." Catalina beamed under the attention, her natural charm immediately winning over her newfound family. Even Oracle seemed genuinely pleased to meet her, though Estrella caught something in her expression that she couldn't quite identify. "I've prepared the guest wing," Oracle said, her voice pleasant and welcoming. "I thought you'd appreciate having your own space while you're adjusting." The guest wing was more beautiful than any home Estrella had ever lived in, with a spacious master bedroom and an adjoining room that had been transformed into a little girl's paradise. Chandler had clearly spent the morning shopping, because the space was filled with books, art supplies, and toys that suggested he'd been paying attention to Catalina's interests. "Do you like it?" he asked nervously, as Catalina explored her new space with obvious delight. "It's like a palace," Catalina breathed, running her fingers over a professional-grade easel that probably cost more than Estrella's monthly rent. "Thank you, Daddy." The casual use of the word sent a visible thrill through Chandler, and Estrella saw him blink back tears of pure joy. That evening, the entire family gathered for dinner on the terrace overlooking the desert landscape. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Estrella felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the sense of belonging to something larger than just herself and Catalina. "Tell us about school," Phoenix encouraged. "What do you like to study?" "Science," Catalina said immediately, "especially biology. I want to be a doctor like Daddy someday and help sick children get better." "That's wonderful," Oracle said, and her interest seemed genuine. "Your father was always brilliant with the sciences, too." As the evening progressed, Estrella began to relax despite her lingering uncertainty about accepting such overwhelming generosity. Watching Chandler with Catalina, the way he listened to her stories, laughed at her jokes, hung on her every word like she was reciting poetry, made every moment of doubt worthwhile. "Bedtime, sweetheart," Estrella said, as Catalina's yawns became too frequent to ignore. "Will you read me a story, Daddy?" Catalina asked, the request so natural it took everyone's breath away. "I would love that more than anything," Chandler said, his voice rough with emotion. As they headed inside, Estrella felt a gentle hand on her arm. Oracle had approached with a smile that seemed warm and welcoming. "I just wanted to say how happy I am that Chandler found you again," Oracle said. "Family is so important, and Catalina is clearly a blessing. I can see how much joy she brings to everyone." "Thank you," Estrella said, though something in Oracle's tone made her slightly uneasy. "That's very kind." "Of course," Oracle said with a bright smile. "We're family now, after all, and family takes care of each other." As Oracle glided away, Estrella was left standing alone on the terrace with the unsettling feeling that something important had just been communicated, though she couldn't quite identify what it was. The words had been welcoming, but the undertone suggested something else entirely, a message wrapped in pleasantries that she'd need time to decode. Inside, she could hear Chandler's voice reading to Catalina, their daughter's delighted laughter, echoing through the house like music. For now, that was enough. They were together, they were safe, and they had time to figure out whatever challenges lay ahead. What she didn't know was that Oracle was already planning those challenges, her mind calculating how to protect what she saw as her territory from these beautiful intruders who had appeared so suddenly in her carefully ordered world. Chapter 5. Seeds of Jealousy. Jealousy is a poison that turns love into obsession and kindness into cruelty, transforming the victim into the villain of their own story. Oracle Bryce had spent 3 months perfecting her performance, learning to smile while her heart burned with resentment at the happiness that seemed to radiate from every corner of the Gilbert estate. From her position at the kitchen window, she watched Chandler teaching Catalina to swim, his infinite patience and obvious joy, a constant reminder of everything she felt slipping away from her grasp. The bitterness had been building since that first night when they'd returned home like conquering heroes, instantly beloved and accepted in ways that Oracle had spent 15 years trying to achieve. She remembered her own early days in this family, the careful navigation of personalities, the constant pressure to prove herself worthy, the exhausting work of molding herself into what she thought they wanted. "They look happy," Phoenix said, joining Oracle with coffee for both of them, her voice warm with genuine affection for the scene unfolding in the pool area. "Blissful," Oracle replied, her voice carefully modulated to hide the venom beneath. "It's quite a transformation, isn't it? The confirmed bachelor and the struggling single mother." "Catalina is a gift," Phoenix said firmly, settling into a chair at the breakfast table. "And Estrella is exactly what this family needed. They've brought light back into Chandler's life." Light. Oracle wanted to laugh at the irony. She had tried for years to be someone's light, someone's source of joy and purpose, only to watch a stranger walk in and effortlessly claim what she'd never been able to earn. The injustice of it burned in her chest like acid. "Of course," Oracle murmured, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. "Though one does have to admire the timing." Phoenix frowned, setting down her coffee with a gentle warning in her voice. "What do you mean?" "Nothing specific," Oracle said with a dismissive wave, though her mind was already working through the implications she wanted to plant. "It's just remarkable how these reunions happen exactly when circumstances are most advantageous." The Aegis seed was planted with surgical precision, not an accusation, but a question that would linger in the subconscious like smoke, coloring future observations with doubt. Oracle had learned the art of poisoning wells through years of navigating social circles, where direct confrontation was vulgar, but subtle manipulation was an art form. Oracle, Phoenix's voice carried a warning that the older woman had learned to recognize. Estrella didn't seek Chandler out. Their daughter was sick. "Of course," Oracle agreed quickly, allowing genuine confusion to color her voice. "I didn't mean to suggest anything inappropriate. I simply find coincidences fascinating from a statistical perspective." The conversation died there, but Oracle saw her words take root in Phoenix's expression, saw the tiny furrow of concern that suggested her grandmother's protective instincts were beginning to engage. Not enough to cause immediate problems, but sufficient to plant seeds of doubt that could be nurtured over time. 3 weeks later, Oracle volunteered to take Catalina school shopping, an offer that was gratefully accepted by Estrella, who was still adjusting to the financial freedom that came with being part of the Gilbert family. Oracle saw it as an opportunity to begin her more sophisticated psychological campaign. "Just us girls," Oracle said brightly as they entered the high-end children's boutique in Scottsdale Fashion Square. "We'll have such fun together." The shopping expedition became Oracle's first masterclass in psychological manipulation. She selected outfit after outfit, each one more expensive than the last, watching Catalina's discomfort grow with each price tag. "This is too much," Catalina said, her young face troubled by the excess accumulating around them. "Mom always says we should be grateful, but not greedy." "Nonsense," Oracle laughed, but there was an edge to it that made Catalina shift uncomfortably. "Your father can afford it. The Gilbert family has resources most people can't imagine." She watched Catalina process this information, saw the confusion and internal conflict as the child tried to reconcile her mother's lessons about modesty with this new reality of unlimited resources. "Of course," Oracle continued, examining a dress that cost more than most families spent on groceries. "In a month, your mother probably isn't accustomed to this lifestyle. Such abundance can be overwhelming for people from more modest backgrounds." "We weren't poor," Catalina said defensively, her loyalty to her mother flaring. "Mom worked really hard to take care of us." "I'm sure she did," Oracle agreed, with false sympathy. "It must have been quite a struggle managing everything alone, though I suppose she always knew that eventually." She let the sentence hang unfinished, allowing Catalina's imagination to fill in implications too complex for her young mind to fully grasp. Later, over ice cream that cost more than Estrella used to spend on an entire meal, Oracle began her more direct assault on Catalina's sense of security. "You know," she said casually, "I knew your father before he became so successful, back when he was just starting his practice, before he had achieved so much." "Really?" Catalina's curiosity was immediate and genuine. "Oh, yes," Oracle said with nostalgic warmth. "He was quite different then, more available, less focused on family responsibilities." The words were carefully chosen to suggest that Chandler's current devotion might be temporary, a novelty that would fade once the excitement of newfound fatherhood wore thin. "He seems really happy now," Catalina said, but there was a question in her voice that Oracle was quick to exploit. "He is," Oracle agreed readily. "Right now. But you know, sweetheart, adult happiness can be complicated. Sometimes people think they want one thing, but then discover they prefer their old life." The conversation continued for another hour, Oracle masterfully planting seeds of insecurity about permanence, belonging, and the stability of their new family arrangement. By the time they returned home, Catalina was quieter than usual, her natural joy dimmed by doubts she was too young to articulate but old enough to feel. That evening's family dinner was more subdued, with Catalina picking at her food and responding to questions with uncharacteristic brevity. Oracle watched with satisfaction as Estrella shot increasingly concerned glances at her daughter. "How was shopping?" Chandler asked, genuinely interested in his daughter's first luxury retail experience. "Fine," Catalina said quietly, not meeting anyone's eyes. "Just fine." Estrella pressed, clearly sensing something was wrong. "You were so excited this morning." Catalina shrugged, pushing expensive food around her plate without appetite. Oracle saw her opportunity and struck with practiced precision. "I think she might be feeling a bit overwhelmed," Oracle said with false concern. "So many changes, so many new experiences. The adjustment from her previous lifestyle to all this," she gestured at the elegant table setting, "can be quite dramatic for young minds." "She's adapting beautifully," Phoenix said firmly. But Oracle caught the flicker of worry in her eyes. "Of course she is," Oracle agreed smoothly. Though children do pick up on adult anxieties, don't they? They sense when the grown-ups around them are uncertain about the future. The comment was delivered with such apparent concern that it took a moment for its true meaning to register. Oracle was suggesting that Estrella's own doubts about their situation were affecting Catalina, creating instability where none had existed before. "What's that supposed to mean?" Estrella asked, her protective instincts flaring. "Nothing at all," Oracle said quickly, raising her hands in innocent denial. "I simply meant that transitions are difficult for everyone involved. Questions about permanence, about whether this arrangement will work long-term, about whether everyone truly belongs here. These uncertainties naturally affect the children." She had managed to plant multiple seeds of doubt in a single statement, questioning whether Estrella belonged, whether their living arrangement was permanent, whether Chandler's commitment was genuine. All delivered with such apparent sympathy that direct confrontation would seem unreasonable. Later that evening, after Catalina had been tucked into bed with unusual quiet that concerned both her parents, Oracle executed her final move of the day. She encountered Estrella in the hallway, returning from an extended good-night ritual that had failed to draw their daughter out of her mysterious mood. "She seems troubled," Oracle observed with false sympathy. "Children have such sensitive hearts, don't they? They worry about things they don't fully understand." "What kind of things?" Estrella asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. "Oh, the usual concerns that children in transitional situations experience," Oracle said with a dismissive wave that somehow made Estrella's anxiety spike higher. "Whether this is really home or just a temporary arrangement, whether the affection is genuine or just novelty." The words hit their target with devastating accuracy. Estrella's biggest fear had always been that Chandler's enthusiasm for fatherhood would fade once the excitement wore off, that they would become an obligation rather than a joy. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Estrella asked, her voice carefully controlled. "Nothing at all," Oracle said with wide, innocent eyes. "I'm simply observing that children are remarkably perceptive. They sense adult uncertainties even when we try to hide them, and naturally, they begin to wonder about their own security." The conversation ended with Oracle gliding away, leaving Estrella standing alone in the hallway with the terrible realization that her own doubts might be affecting her daughter. What she didn't know was that Oracle had spent the afternoon deliberately nurturing those very doubts in Catalina's mind, creating the problem she was now claiming to observe. As she stood there in the quiet house, Estrella didn't notice the small shadow that detached itself from a nearby doorway. Catalina had heard every word of the exchange, and the seeds of doubt that Oracle had planted throughout the day began to bloom into something larger and more dangerous, a growing certainty that their happiness was too good to be true. Oracle's campaign of psychological warfare had begun in earnest, and its first casualty was a 9-year-old girl's faith in the permanence of love. Chapter 6. The First Strike. The cruelest weapons are often wrapped in kindness, wielded by those who smile while they destroy everything you hold dear. 6 months after their reunion, the annual Gilbert Foundation charity gala had become Oracle's chosen battlefield. She had spent weeks orchestrating every detail with the precision of a military campaign: guest list, seating arrangements, entertainment, even the color scheme designed to make Estrella feel like an outsider among Phoenix's social elite. The event was being held at the Arizona Biltmore, its Frank Lloyd Wright-inspired architecture providing a backdrop of sophisticated elegance that Oracle knew would intimidate someone from Estrella's background. She had deliberately chosen a theme of old Phoenix families that celebrated generational wealth and established social position, everything Estrella was not. Oracle stood at the entrance greeting guests, resplendent in a custom gown that had cost more than most people's cars, her smile bright and welcoming, while her eyes calculated the social dynamics she was about to unleash. Every detail of her appearance had been carefully crafted to project effortless sophistication, from her vintage family jewelry to her perfectly styled hair that spoke of generations of good breeding. "Estrella, darling," she said as the small family arrived, air-kissing cheeks, while her gaze assessed every detail of Estrella's appearance with the ruthless precision of a fashion editor. "You look lovely. That dress is charming." The pause before charming was infinitesimal but deliberately crushing, suggesting that while Estrella looked acceptable, she clearly didn't understand the social requirements of such events. Oracle had been counting on this. Despite Chandler's insistence on buying appropriate attire, Estrella's discomfort with ostentatious displays of wealth meant she'd chosen something elegant but understated. Perfect for Oracle's purposes, the dress was beautiful, a midnight blue silk that complemented Estrella's coloring perfectly, but it lacked the designer label and obvious expense that marked true social acceptance in Oracle's world. It was the kind of dress a woman chose when she wanted to look appropriate rather than impressive, and Oracle filed this information away as ammunition for later use. "Thank you," Estrella said simply, refusing to be baited but clearly aware of the undercurrent in Oracle's greeting. Her hand tightened slightly on Catalina's, a protective gesture that Oracle noted with satisfaction. Catalina looked like a princess in her dress, but Oracle noticed how she stayed close to her mother's side, still affected by the doubts that had been carefully nurtured over the past months. The child, who had once been effervescent with confidence, now showed signs of the insecurity Oracle had been cultivating through months of subtle psychological manipulation. The ballroom was filled with Phoenix's old money elite, families whose names graced hospital wings and university buildings, whose children attended the same exclusive schools for generations. Oracle had strategically placed several of Chandler's former girlfriends among the guests, women who had grown up in this world and understood its unspoken rules as naturally as breathing. The guest list itself was a weapon, carefully curated to maximize Estrella's discomfort. Oracle had invited every woman who had ever dated Chandler seriously, every family friend who remembered him as a bachelor, every social contact who would naturally compare his current situation to his previous lifestyle. She had orchestrated a gauntlet of judgment disguised as a charity event. "Chandler Gilbert," Margaret Whitmore's voice carried across the room like a bell, drawing attention to their small group. Margaret was Oracle's secret weapon, tall, blonde, effortlessly elegant, and possessed of the kind of casual confidence that came from never having to worry about money or social acceptance. Margaret had grown up in Paradise Valley, attended the same prep school as Chandler's cousins, and understood the unspoken hierarchies of Phoenix society as intuitively as most people understood gravity. She was also Chandler's most serious relationship before his medical career consumed his life, a fact that Oracle had made sure to research thoroughly. "Margaret," Chandler said with genuine warmth, his face lighting up with the kind of pleasure that came from seeing an old friend. "You look wonderful. Estrella, I'd like you to meet Margaret Whitmore. Margaret, this is Estrella Davis and my daughter Catalina." The introduction was perfectly polite, but Oracle watched Margaret's reaction with the satisfaction of a chess master watching an opponent walk into a carefully prepared trap. Margaret's smile was warm and genuine, but her eyes held the kind of assessment that women of her class used to categorize people into their proper social strata. "Your daughter," Margaret repeated, her voice carrying just the right note of surprise, mixed with delight. "How wonderful! She's absolutely beautiful. Those eyes are unmistakably Gilbert eyes." Oracle saw the comment register in Estrella's expression, saw the slight stiffening that suggested growing awareness of being evaluated, and found lacking Margaret's casual assumption of familiarity with Gilbert family genetics was both welcoming and excluding. It suggested intimate knowledge of family history that Estrella couldn't possibly share. "And this is Oracle Bryce, Payson's wife." Chandler continued with introductions, his voice carrying the kind of family pride that made Oracle's heart swell with temporary satisfaction. Oracle organized this entire event. "How impressive," Margaret said, her tone suggesting genuine respect for Oracle's social achievements. The admiration in her voice was exactly what Oracle had been craving for years, recognition of her contributions to the family's social standing. "The Bryce family has always been so civic-minded. Your mother and I serve on the museum board together." The comment was perfectly calculated to highlight the social connections that Oracle possessed and Estrella lacked. It spoke of generations of civic involvement, of family networks that stretched back decades, of the kind of embedded social capital that couldn't be acquired through marriage or achievement alone. Oracle saw the observation register in Estrella's expression, watched the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested growing discomfort with her outsider status. Every carefully crafted interaction was designed to reinforce the message that Estrella didn't belong in this world, that her presence here was temporary and conditional. As the evening progressed, Oracle orchestrated a series of seemingly innocent interactions designed to emphasize Estrella's unfamiliarity with this world. Conversations flowed naturally toward topics that required insider knowledge, exclusive schools that required family connections for admission, charity events that demanded significant financial contributions, vacation destinations that spoke of inherited wealth rather than earned success. "The children's sailing program at the yacht club is excellent," suggested Catherine Morrison, another old friend whose presence Oracle had specifically requested. Catherine had grown up summering in San Diego, wintering in Scottsdale, and understood the seasonal migrations of Phoenix's wealthy families as naturally as migratory birds understood flight patterns. "Though I suppose there's quite a waiting list. These clubs can be so particular about membership." The comment was delivered with bright enthusiasm, as if Catherine was genuinely excited to share helpful information about educational opportunities. And for Catalina, but Oracle caught the subtle emphasis on particular about membership, the implication that club membership required more than just financial resources. It required social credentials that couldn't be purchased. "We're not really boat people," Estrella said with quiet dignity, but Oracle caught the flush of embarrassment that colored her cheeks. The admission marked her as someone unfamiliar with the leisure activities that defined Phoenix's social calendar. "Of course not," Catherine said with bright understanding that somehow managed to be more insulting than direct dismissal. "Not everyone grows up around the water. Though Catalina might enjoy learning, children adapt so quickly to new environments." The observation hung in the air like a social classification, marking Estrella as someone who hadn't been raised with the privileges that Chandler's other companions took for granted, while simultaneously suggesting that Catalina might be able to transcend her mother's limitations through proper exposure to superior influences. Oracle's masterpiece came during the silent auction, where she had strategically placed items with starting bids that would strain most normal budgets but were pocket change for the Gilbert family. The auction catalogue read like a guide to luxury living: vacation homes in Aspen, private wine tastings in Napa, exclusive art pieces from galleries that most people had only read about in magazines. She watched as Estrella studied the bid, sheets with growing alarm, clearly calculating costs that would have seemed impossible to her just months ago. The prices weren't just expensive, they were casually, carelessly expensive, the kind of amounts that people in this room spent on weekend entertainment without thinking twice. "The vacation home in Aspen is lovely," Oracle commented casually. appearing at Estrella's shoulder as she studied the auction items with the focused attention of someone trying to decode a foreign language. Though, of course, the maintenance costs can be astronomical. Some people find owning multiple properties more trouble than it's worth. The comment was designed to suggest that Oracle spoke from personal experience with such properties, that the kind of wealth required to maintain vacation homes was familiar territory for the Gilbert family. It was a casual display of financial superiority wrapped in helpful concern. "I imagine so," Estrella said carefully, clearly out of her depth in a world where vacation homes were casual acquisitions rather than impossible dreams. Her voice carried the careful neutrality of someone trying not to reveal their complete unfamiliarity with the subject at hand. Of course, Chandler's previous girlfriend Madison had such wonderful taste in properties, Oracle continued with apparent nostalgia, her voice carrying just the right note of wistful remembrance. She understood the investment potential of real estate in established resort communities, such a sophisticated eye for these things. The reference to Madison was deliberately chosen. Oracle had made sure to learn about every woman in Chandler's past, cataloging their advantages over Estrella like weapons in an arsenal. Madison had been wealthy in her own right, the kind of woman who could match Chandler's success with inherited resources rather than depending on his generosity. "I'm sure she did," Estrella said, but Oracle heard the strain in her voice, the growing weight of comparisons to women who seemed to fit this world in ways she never could. Each reference to Chandler's past relationships was another reminder that Estrella was an anomaly in his romantic history, different from the kind of women he'd chosen when left to his own preferences. The evening's centerpiece was Oracle's speech about the Gilbert Foundation's mission, delivered from the podium with practiced grace and obvious familiarity with public speaking. She had spent weeks crafting the address, making sure to reference her years of service to the family's charitable interests, her deep understanding of their values and traditions, her role as the bridge between their private generosity and public recognition. "The Gilbert family has always believed that privilege comes with responsibility," Oracle said, her gaze finding Estrella in the audience with laser precision. "Those of us who have been blessed with resources and opportunity have an obligation to share those blessings with others, less fortunate." The words were perfectly chosen to position Estrella as a recipient of Gilbert generosity, rather than a family member, someone to be helped rather than someone who belonged. Oracle emphasized "those of us" to create clear distinction between family members and charity cases, between people who had earned their place and people who had been granted accommodation. She saw the direct hit register in Estrella's expression, watched the way her shoulders tensed with recognition of the subtle insult. The speech continued for another 10 minutes, each carefully crafted sentence designed to reinforce the message that charity was noble but temporary, that generosity had limits, that acceptance into their world required more than just need. But Oracle's true masterstroke came during the evening's final reception, when she engineered a conversation that would shatter Estrella's confidence completely. She had positioned herself near the dessert table, where several older family friends were discussing the evening's success, their voices carrying the authority of people who had watched Phoenix society evolve for decades. "Such a lovely family," commented Eleanor Gilbert, Chandler's great-aunt, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had been present for 4 generations of Gilbert family developments. Eleanor was Oracle's perfect, unwitting accomplice, elderly enough to speak, without filters, respected enough that her opinions carried weight, and naive enough to not realize she was being manipulated. "Indeed," Oracle agreed warmly, her voice pitched to carry just the right distance without seeming deliberately loud. "Chandler seems quite taken with his new situation." New situation. Eleanor repeated with the slight confusion that sometimes came with advanced age, her mind struggling to process rapid changes in familiar patterns. I suppose it is all rather sudden, isn't it? After all these years of independence, suddenly he's a family man. Sudden indeed, Oracle said with carefully modulated concern, her voice carrying just enough worry to plant seeds of doubt without seeming malicious. One does hope it's genuine affection rather than, well, one hates to be cynical about these matters, but circumstances can be so compelling. The comment was delivered with perfect pitch, concerned but not accusatory, observational rather, than judgmental. Oracle had learned to plant doubt through questions rather than statements, allowing others to draw their own conclusions while maintaining plausible innocence. What kind of circumstances? Eleanor asked with the directness that came from decades of social observation, her voice carrying clearly across the reception area despite Oracle's careful staging. Oracle glanced around as if ensuring privacy, then leaned closer with false reluctance, her voice dropping to the kind of confidential whisper that actually carried further than normal conversation. Well, a struggling single mother, a successful physician, a child who needs financial security. One can see how the practical considerations might outweigh purely romantic sentiment. The implication hung in the air like poison gas, suggesting that Estrella's feelings might be motivated by financial desperation rather than genuine love. Oracle knew that Eleanor's hearing wasn't perfect, knew that she would speak louder than necessary, knew that the conversation would carry to nearby listeners, including Estrella herself. "Oh my," Eleanor said with growing concern, her voice, indeed, carrying across the reception area with the clarity of someone who didn't realize she was broadcasting family gossip. "I hadn't considered... well, I suppose these modern situations can be quite complex." Oracle saw her words hit their target with devastating precision. Estrella's face went white as she overheard the conversation, understanding immediately that her motives were being questioned, that her love for Chandler was being reduced to gold-digging opportunism by people who barely knew her but felt qualified to judge her character. The conversation continued for another few minutes, with Oracle feeding Eleanor just enough doubt to keep the speculation flowing while maintaining her own appearance of reluctant concern. Each word was carefully chosen to maximize damage while preserving her own reputation as someone who was simply worried about family welfare. The final blow came as guests were preparing to leave, when Oracle approached Estrella with false sympathy written across her perfectly made-up features. She had timed this confrontation for maximum impact when Estrella would be emotionally exhausted from hours of social warfare disguised as charity celebration. "I hope you had a lovely evening," she said with bright concern, her voice carrying the kind of patronizing warmth that made every word feel like condescension. "I know these events can be overwhelming for people who aren't accustomed to this level of social complexity." The comment was perfectly crafted to suggest that Estrella's discomfort was due to her own inadequacy rather than Oracle's. Deliberate manipulation. It positioned the evening's social challenges as natural consequences of class differences rather than engineered obstacles designed to create exactly this kind of distress. "It was educational," Estrella replied carefully, her dignity intact despite the emotional battering she'd endured throughout the evening. Her voice carried the controlled neutrality of someone who had learned not to give their enemies additional ammunition. "I'm sure it was," Oracle agreed with patronizing warmth, her smile never wavering despite the cruelty of her intentions. "Please don't let the gossip trouble you. People in our circles do love to speculate about new relationships, especially when the circumstances seem convenient." The word convenient landed like a slap, carrying all the implications Oracle had been building throughout the evening. She had managed to suggest that Estrella's relationship with Chandler was based on financial opportunism rather than love, that her presence in their family was temporary and motivated by desperation rather than genuine feeling. As Estrella gathered Catalina and prepared to leave, Oracle watched with satisfaction as her campaign of psychological warfare achieved its first major victory. The confident woman who had walked into the gala was leaving diminished, questioning her own motives and her place in the Gilbert family. But Oracle had underestimated the depth of love that bound Chandler to Estrella and Catalina. Her victory would prove to be temporary, and the tactics she'd employed would soon become the weapons of her own destruction. The war for the Gilbert family's soul had begun in earnest, and the first battle had been won through cruelty disguised as social observation. Chapter 7. The Web of Lies begins. Desperation breeds creativity in the art of destruction, turning otherwise reasonable people into architects of their own downfall. Dr. Finch's gambling addiction had already cost him his marriage, his relationship with his children, and most of his assets, but it took Oracle Bryce's visit to make him realize it might also cost him his medical license. As he sat in his office at Phoenix General Hospital at midnight, staring at collection notices that painted his financial situation in stark, unforgiving numbers, he felt like a man drowning in debt with no hope of rescue. The knock on his door startled him from his calculations of despair. "Come in," he called, expecting to see one of the night shift residents with a consultation request. Instead, Oracle Bryce glided into his office like an avenging angel wrapped in designer clothing, her presence immediately transforming the shabby space into something that felt important and dangerous. "Dr. Reed," she said smoothly, settling into the chair across from his desk without invitation. "I hope you'll forgive the late hour. I need to discuss a sensitive matter that requires your particular expertise." Reed studied the woman before him, recognizing her as the wife of Payson Gilbert, sister-in-law to the renowned pediatric surgeon whose reputation was legendary throughout Phoenix medical circles. Her presence in his modest office felt surreal, like finding a jewel in a junkyard. "How can I help you?" he asked carefully, though something in her manner set off alarm bells in his addled brain. Oracle opened her purse and withdrew a cashier's check, placing it on his desk with the precision of someone laying down a royal flush. The amount written in elegant script made Reed's breath catch in his throat, enough to cover his most pressing debts and buy him time to rebuild his crumbling life. "I need assistance with a family matter," Oracle said, with the calm directness of someone accustomed to purchasing solutions to complex problems. "Specifically, I need help protecting my brother-in-law from a potentially devastating fraud." Reed's hands trembled as he stared at the check, hope and terror warring in his chest like opposing armies. "What kind of fraud?" "The kind involving false paternity claims," Oracle said, her voice carrying just the right mix of concern and determination. "A woman has appeared claiming that her daughter belongs to my brother-in-law, demanding support and recognition for a child that couldn't possibly be his." She spun her web of lies with masterful skill, painting Estrella as a calculating opportunist who had targeted Chandler for his wealth and success. According to Oracle's fictional narrative, Estrella had researched successful single doctors in Phoenix, chosen Chandler as her mark, and crafted an elaborate story about their supposed college romance. "The real tragedy," Oracle continued with false sympathy, "is that my brother-in-law wants so desperately to be a father that he's willing to believe obvious lies. His kindness is being used against him by someone who sees dollar signs where he sees family." Reed found himself nodding along, his desperation making him susceptible to any narrative that justified accepting the money that could save his career. Oracle had read his psychological profile perfectly, understanding that addicts were experts at rationalizing terrible decisions when the stakes were high enough. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Reed asked, though he already knew the answer would damn him. "I need you to run DNA tests on samples I'll provide," Oracle said simply, "and I need the results to reflect the truth, that this child is not related to my brother-in-law." She produced 2 sealed vials from her purse, labeled with clinical precision. "Hair samples from both parties. I need official documentation that will hold up under scrutiny." Reed stared at the vials, understanding that accepting them would cross a line he could never uncross. But the check on his desk represented salvation from the financial disaster that threatened to destroy what remained of his life. "This could end my career if anyone discovered it," he said weakly, one last protest against the inevitable. "No one will discover anything," Oracle assured him with practiced confidence. "I'm very good at keeping secrets, Dr. Reed, and you'll be very good at forgetting this conversation ever happened." Over the next week, Reed worked on falsifying the DNA results with the same attention to detail he'd once brought to legitimate medical research. Oracle had provided him with authentic lab equipment and official forms, making the forgery indistinguishable from genuine testing. His gambling addiction had taught him to be creative under pressure, and now that creativity was being applied to destroying an innocent family. What Reed didn't know was that his every move was being observed by Dr. Sarah Chen, the head of laboratory services, who had been investigating irregularities in testing procedures. Her suspicions had been aroused by Reed's unusual late-night presence in the lab and his requests for materials that didn't correspond to any official work orders. On the night Reed completed his falsification, Dr. Chen was conducting her own surveillance from the adjacent lab. Through the interior window, she watched him seal fraudulent documents in official envelopes, his face a mask of self-loathing and desperation. "What are you doing, Finch?" she whispered to herself, her heart breaking for a colleague whose downward spiral she'd been helplessly watching for months. Dr. Chen made a decision that would change everything. She quietly accessed the lab's computer system and ran her own DNA analysis on the hair samples Reed had been given, using equipment that he hadn't realized was monitored by security cameras. The authentic results showed a 99.97% probability of paternity, conclusive proof that Chandler Gilbert was indeed Catalina's biological father. As she printed the real results and sealed them in a secure envelope, Dr. Chen felt the weight of moral responsibility settling on her shoulders. She had evidence of criminal fraud, but exposing it would require her to step forward as a witness against powerful people who could destroy her career with a phone call. The next morning, Oracle arrived at Reed's office to collect her weapon of mass destruction, her face radiant with anticipation of the chaos she was about to unleash. "Perfect work," she said with satisfaction as she examined the falsified documents. "These will serve their purpose beautifully." "What happens now?" Reed asked, unable to meet her gaze. "Now justice is served," Oracle said with righteous conviction. "That would have been admirable if it weren't based on complete lies. An innocent man is protected from exploitation, and a fraud is exposed before more damage can be done." As Oracle left the hospital with her forged evidence, she felt a surge of triumph that would prove short-lived. She had no idea that Dr. Chen was already preparing to expose her scheme, armed with authentic DNA results and security footage that would prove Reed's criminal actions. Reed, meanwhile, sat alone in his office staring at the cashed check that had purchased his soul, understanding too late that some deals with the devil come with consequences that no amount of money could repair. The stage was set for the most devastating betrayal the Gilbert family had ever faced. But the truth has a way of surfacing no matter how deeply it's buried beneath lies and desperation. Oracle's web of deception was about to collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. Chapter 8. The Devastating Betrayal. The deadliest. Poison is always served with honey, delivered by those who smile while they destroy your world. Oracle chose her moment with the calculated precision of a master strategist, waiting until Chandler was called away for an emergency surgery that would keep him occupied for hours. The family had gathered for their monthly dinner, the desert, twilight painting the sky in watercolors, while they shared stories and laughter on the terrace overlooking Phoenix's twinkling lights. Estrella watched Catalina help Phoenix arrange flowers from the garden, their heads bent together in concentration, and felt a contentment that still seemed miraculous after 9 months of careful family building. The doubts that Oracle had been nurturing were still present, like shadows at the edge of her happiness, but moments like these made her believe they truly belonged here. "Where's Uncle Chandler?" Catalina asked, glancing toward his empty chair. "He promised to help me with my science project after dinner." "Emergency surgery," Estrella explained. "A little boy was brought in with complications from a burst appendix." "That's our Chandler," Phoenix said with affectionate pride. "Even off duty, he can't say no to a child who needs help." Oracle had been unusually quiet throughout the evening, her perfect smile masking the anticipation building in her chest like pressure in a volcano. Finally, she stood with an expression of grim determination that made everyone fall silent. "Actually, I'm glad we have some privacy," she said, her voice carrying an authority that commanded attention. "There's something I need to share with all of you." The easy warmth of the evening evaporated like moisture in desert heat. Estrella felt her stomach clench with premonition, recognizing something predatory in Oracle's stance. "Oracle, dear," Phoenix began, clearly sensing danger. "Perhaps this isn't the time." "This is exactly the time," Oracle interrupted, her voice carrying steel that none of them had heard before. "Before this deception continues any longer." She walked to her purse and withdrew an official-looking envelope, holding it like a weapon as she faced the assembled family. "I've been conducting some research into Miss Davis and her claims about Catalina's parentage." Estrella's blood turned to ice water. "What kind of research?" "The kind any responsible family member would conduct when strangers appear claiming long-lost relationships," Oracle said with false righteousness. "I hired a private investigator to verify the facts." The lie rolled off her tongue with practiced ease. She had rehearsed this story for weeks, knowing that shock and confusion would prevent detailed questions about her fictional investigator. "Oracle, this is completely inappropriate," Payson said, his voice sharp with disapproval and growing alarm. "Chandler and Estrella have handled their situation." "Have they?" Oracle laughed, the sound like breaking crystal. "Or have we all been participants in an elaborate fraud?" She tore open the envelope with theatrical precision, withdrawing the falsified DNA results that Dr. Reed had created. "These are official results from an independent laboratory analysis of DNA samples from both Chandler and Catalina." Phoenix stood abruptly, her face pale with growing understanding of what was happening. "Oracle, what have you done?" "What someone should have done months ago," Oracle said, her voice rising with manufactured outrage. "Protected this family from a woman who saw opportunity and seized it with both hands." She held up the false results, her voice carrying across the terrace with devastating clarity. "According to this certified laboratory analysis, there is 0 probability that Chandler Gilbert is Catalina's biological father." The words detonated like explosives, leaving the family stunned and reeling. Catalina, who had been listening with growing confusion, suddenly went very still, her small hands frozen on the flowers she'd been arranging. "That's impossible," Estrella whispered, the color draining from her face. "That can't be right." "I'm afraid the science is quite conclusive," Oracle said with false sympathy, her performance worthy of Academy recognition. "The child is not Chandler's daughter. She never was." "Mommy!" Catalina's voice was small and frightened. "What does that mean?" Estrella felt her world crumbling like a sandcastle hit by tsunamis. The DNA test Chandler had conducted months ago had confirmed Catalina's parentage. She'd seen his joy, felt his certainty, built their new life on that foundation. But faced with this official-looking document and Oracle's confident accusations, doubt began seeping into her mind like poison. "I don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "Chandler ran tests. The results were positive." "The results were what you needed them to be," Oracle said with devastating cruelty. "Amazing what desperation can accomplish when paired with opportunity." The implication was clear and brutal. That Estrella had somehow manipulated the original test results, that everything about their reunion had been an elaborate deception designed to trap a wealthy man through his desire for family. "How dare you?" Phoenix said, rising to her feet with fury blazing in her eyes. "How dare you attack this family with your suspicions and accusations?" "I'm protecting this family," Oracle shot back, her mask of concern finally slipping to reveal the ugly jealousy beneath. "From a woman who appeared at exactly the right moment, with exactly the right story, to capture a lonely man's heart and his wallet." "That's not true," Estrella said desperately, but her voice lacked conviction. The official document in Oracle's hands seemed to mock everything she knew to be real and true. Payson snatched the papers from Oracle's hands, studying them with growing horror. The forgery was perfect, indistinguishable from authentic laboratory results. "These look legitimate," he said quietly, each word another nail in Estrella's coffin. "Of course they're legitimate," Oracle said triumphantly. "I hired the most reputable laboratory in Phoenix. They confirmed what any objective observer could have seen from the beginning." "Stop it!" Catalina suddenly cried, tears streaming down her face as the adult conversation finally penetrated her confusion. "Stop saying mean things about my mommy." The sight of her daughter's distress cut through Estrella's shock like lightning. Whatever was happening here, whatever cruel game Oracle was playing, Catalina didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of adult machinations. "We're leaving," Estrella said quietly, gathering her daughter into her arms with shaking hands. "Estrella, wait," Phoenix pleaded, her voice breaking with confusion and pain. "Let's discuss this rationally. There must be some explanation." "The explanation is that I'm a liar and a fraud," Estrella said bitterly, Oracle's poison finally finding its mark. "At least according to your daughter-in-law." She carried Catalina toward the house, her dignity in tatters, but her spine straight with pride. Behind her she could hear heated arguments erupting between family members, Phoenix defending her while Payson demanded answers from his wife. In their beautiful guest room, Estrella packed their belongings with hands that trembled so badly she could barely fold clothes. Each item felt like a goodbye to a dream that had been too perfect to last. "Why are we leaving?" Catalina sobbed. "I thought this was our home now. I thought Daddy loved us." "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," Estrella said, her voice steady despite tears streaming down her face. "And sometimes dreams don't come true the way we hope they will." She wrote a letter to Chandler with hands that shook so violently she could barely hold the pen. Chandler. "I don't understand what happened tonight, but I can't subject Catalina to any more confusion and pain. The DNA results Oracle presented contradict everything we believe to be true, and I can't stay here while the family questions my character and my motives. I never wanted your money or your status. I only wanted Catalina to know her father. But if there's doubt about her parentage, if there's any question about my honesty, then it's better for everyone if we disappear. Please don't look for us. Catalina deserves peace and stability, not the chaos that seems to follow wherever we go. I'm sorry for any pain this has caused you. What we had was beautiful, even if it wasn't real. Estrella. As they slipped out into the desert night, Catalina clinging to her stuffed coyote and Estrella carrying their hastily packed bags, neither of them saw Dr. Sarah Chen sitting in her car across the street. She held the authentic DNA results in her hands, tears of rage streaming down her face as she watched Oracle's victims flee into the darkness. Oracle stood at the window watching them leave, satisfaction written across her features like a signature. On a death warrant. She had won. The interlopers were gone, and the Gilbert family was hers again. But victories built on lies have a way of crumbling when truth finally surfaces, and Oracle's foundation was about to be shaken by forces she never could have anticipated. The war was over, but the reckoning was just beginning. Chapter 9. The Hunt for Truth. Truth is like water in the desert, scarce and precious, but when it finally surfaces, it has the power to bring life back to the most barren landscapes. Chandler returned home at 3 in the morning, exhausted from 9 hours of delicate surgery that had saved a 6-year-old boy's life. His hands still carried the slight tremor that came from hours of microscopic precision, but his heart felt light with the knowledge that another child would return home to grateful parents. The house felt different as he entered through the garage. Too quiet, charged with the kind of tension that follows emotional explosions. He expected to find Estrella and Catalina asleep, planned to steal a few minutes watching his daughter sleep and maybe sharing quiet conversation with the woman who had transformed his solitary existence into something beautiful and meaningful. Instead, he found Oracle waiting in the kitchen, her face a masterpiece of false sympathy that made alarm bells ring in his exhausted mind. "Chandler," she said with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of terrible news. "I'm so sorry you had to come." "Home to this?" "To what?" he asked, though ice was already forming in his chest. "Where are Estrella and Catalina?" Oracle launched into her carefully rehearsed performance, spinning her web of lies with the skill of someone who had spent weeks perfecting every detail. She produced the falsified documents with flourishes of regret, painted Estrella as a calculating opportunist who had finally been exposed, and delivered each devastating blow with the precision of a surgeon removing diseased tissue. As she spoke, Chandler felt his world cracking apart piece by piece. The official-looking papers in his hands seemed to mock everything he'd believed, every moment of joy he'd experienced with his daughter, every plan he'd made for their future together. "This can't be right," he said, his voice hollow with shock. "The test I ran showed positive paternity. Catalina is my daughter." "I know this is difficult to accept," Oracle said with practiced gentleness, "but you have to face the truth. She used your kindness against you, told you exactly what you wanted to hear because she saw a successful, lonely man who could provide the security she'd never been able to give her daughter." Chandler stared at the falsified results until the numbers blurred together, his brilliant mind struggling to process information that contradicted every instinct he possessed. Catalina had his eyes, his stubborn streak, his love of science. She felt like his daughter in every cell of his body. "Where did they go?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," Oracle lied smoothly. "Estrella packed their things and left. She said she couldn't stay here knowing that her deception had been exposed." But even as Oracle spun her fiction, Chandler found the letter Estrella had left, and something in her words struck him as wrong. The pain was too real, the confusion too genuine. This wasn't the writing of a woman whose con had been exposed. This was the heartbreak of someone who had been blindsided by accusations she couldn't understand. For the next 2 days, Chandler threw himself into investigating the situation. With the methodical precision he brought to complex medical cases, he visited the laboratory that had allegedly processed the DNA samples, only to discover they had no record of any test involving his name or biological material. "That's impossible," he told the lab director, holding up the falsified documents. "I have the results right here." The director examined the papers carefully, then shook her head with growing concern. "Dr. Gilbert, these aren't our forms. The letterhead is similar, but the format is completely wrong, and this signature doesn't match any of our certified technicians." Chandler felt the first crack in Oracle's story, but he needed more evidence before he could act on his growing suspicions. His investigation led him to Phoenix General Hospital, where he began asking discreet questions about DNA testing procedures and laboratory security. It was there that Dr. Sarah Chen found him, her face pale with determination and her hands clutching an envelope that seemed to burn with importance. "Dr. Gilbert," she said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard, "I need to speak with you about something urgent, something about your daughter." Chandler's heart stopped. "Do you know where she is?" "No, but I know what happened to her," Dr. Chen said, her voice filled with barely controlled anger. "And what I'm about to tell you will destroy everything you thought you knew about the past week." She led him to a quiet corner of the hospital cafeteria and told him everything. Oracle's midnight visit to Dr. Reed, the $50,000 bribe, the falsified DNA results that had been created in the same lab where authentic tests had proven Catalina's parentage beyond doubt. "That monster," Chandler whispered, staring at the real results that confirmed what his heart had known all along. "She destroyed my family with lies." "Dr. Reed collapsed under the guilt yesterday," Dr. Chen continued. "He confessed everything to the hospital administration. He's been terminated and will face criminal charges for fraud. I have security footage of the entire transaction, recorded conversations, and the authentic DNA results that prove your daughter's parentage." Chandler felt rage building in his chest that was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Oracle hadn't just lied to him. She had deliberately terrorized an innocent child, had sent the woman he loved fleeing into the night, believing herself to be a fraud, had weaponized his own family against the people he cherished most. "I have to find them," he said, rising with desperate urgency. "I've been working on that," Dr. Chen said, producing a piece of paper from her pocket. "I have contacts in community services. Estrella Davis has been working multiple jobs again, a community center, a grocery store, and an office cleaning service. She's rented a small apartment in Tempe." Chandler memorized the address, his heart hammering with hope and terror. How much damage had Oracle's lies caused? Would Estrella ever forgive him for not believing in her immediately? Would Catalina still want him as her father after being told he'd rejected her? "Thank you," he said to Dr. Chen, his voice thick with emotion. "You've saved my family." The drive to Tempe felt like the longest journey of his life. The apartment, complex, was a modest 2-story building with a small playground where a few children played despite the late hour. It was worlds away from the luxury of his Paradise Valley estate, but it felt more like home than his mansion ever had. He found their apartment and knocked gently, his heart in his throat as he heard cautious footsteps approaching the door. Through the peephole, he could see Estrella's silhouette, and he understood that she was checking whether it was safe to answer. "It's me," he said simply. "It's Chandler." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity before he heard locks turning. The door opened to reveal Estrella, beautiful despite the exhaustion written across her features, her eyes red from crying, but still defiant. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly, though something in her voice suggested she was glad he'd come. "I have something to show you," he said, holding up the authentic DNA results along with photographs of Dr. Reed's confession and Oracle's check. The truth about what Oracle did to us. As understanding dawned in Estrella's eyes as she saw the real proof of Catalina's parentage and realized the scope of Oracle's betrayal, Chandler watched hope begin to kindle again in the woman he'd never stopped loving. Behind her, a small voice called out with tentative joy, "Daddy, is that really you?" And Chandler knew that despite all the pain and deception, despite Oracle's cruel manipulations, their family was about to find its way. Home through the desert of lies, back to the oasis of truth. The hunt was over. Now the healing could begin. Chapter 10. Forgiveness and Family Healing. The measure of a family's strength isn't found in the absence of storms, but in their ability to rebuild together after the winds have torn everything down. The confrontation took place in the Gilbert family's living room at dawn, with all the principal players assembled like actors in the final scene of a tragedy that had consumed too many innocent lives. Oracle sat in the corner chair, her perfect composure finally cracked, her face a mask of desperate defiance as the evidence of her crimes mounted like an avalanche of truth. Chandler stood with his arm around Estrella, Catalina safely tucked. Between them, the authentic DNA results spread across the coffee table like irrefutable proof of Oracle's malicious deception. Dr. Chen had provided security footage, recorded conversations, and documented evidence that painted a picture of calculated cruelty that shocked even those who thought they knew Oracle well. $50,000, Chandler said, his voice deadly quiet as he faced the woman who had nearly destroyed his family. "That's what you paid Dr. Reed to create false DNA results. That's the price you put on my daughter's happiness." Oracle's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the ugly jealousy and resentment that had driven her to such extremes. "I was protecting this family," she said desperately, her voice shrill with the panic of someone watching their carefully constructed world collapse. "Protecting you from a woman who was obviously using you." "Using me?" Chandler's voice rose, with barely controlled fury. "The only person who used anyone here was you. You used my trust, my family's trust, and most unforgivably, you used an innocent child as a weapon in your sick campaign." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of broken relationships and shattered trust. Phoenix sat with tears streaming down her face, her hands shaking as she processed the magnitude of what her daughter-in-law had done to the granddaughter she'd come to love. "Oracle," Payson said quietly, his voice breaking with the kind of pain that comes from discovering that someone you've shared your life with is capable of monstrous cruelty. "How could you do this? How could you hurt a child?" Oracle's defiance crumbled into something that looked like shame, but Estrella had learned not to trust anything that came from this woman's performances. "I was losing everything," Oracle whispered. "You all accepted them so easily, gave them what I'd worked 15 years to earn. I thought if I could just make them go away." "Go away." Catalina's small voice cut through the adult conversation like a blade. She stepped forward with the kind of courage that only children possess when defending the people they love. "You wanted us to go away." Oracle looked down at the child whose life she had tried to destroy, and for a moment, something that might have been genuine remorse flickered across her features. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was afraid. Afraid of what? Catalina asked with devastating directness. Afraid of me loving my daddy? Afraid of Mommy being happy? The questions hung in the air like accusations delivered by someone too young to understand the adult complexities of jealousy and insecurity, but old enough to recognize cruelty when it was directed at her family. I was afraid of being forgotten, Oracle admitted, the truth finally forced from her by the innocent honesty of a child's questions. I was afraid you would replace me, make me unnecessary. Estrella found herself moving closer to Oracle's chair, compelled by something she couldn't name, not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Oracle, she said gently, no one was trying to replace you. We were trying to become family together. Were you? Oracle looked up with tear-filled eyes, her voice carrying the kind of vulnerability that comes from years of insecurity finally being exposed. Because it felt like I was watching everything I'd worked for slip away, while you received unconditional acceptance just for existing. The confession revealed the depth of Oracle's insecurity, the years of feeling like an outsider, despite her, marriage into the Gilbert family, the constant fear that her place was conditional and could be revoked at any moment. Oracle, Phoenix said through her tears, you've been my daughter for 15 years. Nothing could change that. But what you've done, she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. I know, Oracle whispered. I know I've destroyed everything. I know there's no coming back from this. Catalina, who had been listening to the adult conversation with the seriousness of someone, far older than her 9 years, suddenly stepped forward again. Are you sorry? She asked Oracle directly, her young voice carrying a wisdom that silenced the room. Oracle looked into the face of the child she had tried to remove from her family and saw her own reflection. Someone desperate for love and belonging, someone who had made terrible choices from fear and insecurity. Yes, she whispered, tears beginning to flow freely down her cheeks. I'm so very sorry. I was selfish and cruel, and I hurt people who didn't deserve it. I hurt you, and you're just a little girl who wanted a family. Then we can forgive you, Catalina said, with the simple directness that only children possess. Mommy says forgiveness doesn't mean we forget what happened, but it means we don't let the hurt keep poisoning our hearts. The offer of forgiveness from the child she had most wronged broke through Oracle's defenses completely. She sobbed with the kind of raw emotion that comes from years of suppressed pain finally finding release. I don't deserve forgiveness, Oracle said through her tears. I don't deserve any of you. That's the point of forgiveness, Estrella said gently, surprising everyone by extending her hand to Oracle. It's not about deserving it. It's about choosing love over bitterness, hope over revenge. The gesture was so unexpected, so generous, that it left the entire room speechless. Oracle stared at the offered hand as if it were a lifeline thrown to someone drowning in their own mistakes. Why? Oracle whispered, why would you forgive me after what I've done? Because Catalina is watching, Estrella said simply, and I want her to learn that families can survive anything if they choose healing over hatred. 1 year later, the Gilbert family gathered for Chandler and Estrella's wedding in the desert garden at sunset, the ceremony small and intimate, with only their closest family present. Catalina served as flower girl, her face radiant with joy as she watched her parents exchange vows that had been tested by fire and proven unbreakable. Oracle sat in the front row beside Payson, their marriage rebuilt on a foundation of honesty rather than performance. She had spent the year in therapy, working to understand the insecurities that had driven her to such destructive extremes, learning to find her worth in being authentically herself rather than in performing roles she thought others wanted. Dr. Reed was serving his sentence, but Oracle had used her own money to establish a treatment center for gambling addiction, turning her guilt into action that would help others avoid the desperation that had made him vulnerable to her manipulation. As Chandler and Estrella danced under the Arizona stars, Catalina asleep in Phoenix's arms, and their family complete. Around them, they both understood that they had built something stronger than what they'd started with. Their love had been tested by deception and lies, but it had emerged purified by truth and strengthened by forgiveness. "Thank you," Chandler whispered as they swayed together in the desert moonlight, "for teaching me that the strongest families aren't those who never break, but those who heal together." "Thank you," Estrella whispered back, "for showing me that love is worth fighting for, even when the battle seems impossible to win." The Gilbert family had learned that redemption was possible for anyone willing to face their mistakes honestly, that forgiveness had the power to transform even the most broken relationships, and that love, real, honest, tested love, could survive anything when people chose to fight for each other rather than against each other. In the end, Oracle's attempts to destroy their family had only made them stronger, teaching them that true belonging isn't something that can be earned through performance or lost through the presence of others. It's something that grows when people choose each other every day, through good times and bad, through mistakes and forgiveness, through all the beautiful, messy, complicated realities of being human together. The desert had witnessed many stories of survival against impossible odds. Tonight, it had witnessed one more, the story of a family that had found its way home, not despite the storms they'd weathered, but because of them.